The day Earth entered the Galactic Union was a monumental one. After decades of exploration and attempts at communication, humanity had finally been accepted into the Intergalactic Alliance of Advanced Species. The news spread like wildfire across the globe, with celebrations erupting everywhere. Humanity was no longer a solitary planet in the cosmos. They were now part of a larger, interconnected universe. As part of the celebration, Earth's leaders decided to send a delegation to Venkera, the home world of the Rokorians. The Rokorians were one of the most respected and feared species in the galaxy. Towering over most other races at 8 feet tall, they had a reputation as fierce warriors and skilled diplomats. Their home planet was known for its rugged landscapes, vast jungles, and great mountain ranges, where their people had trained for centuries in the arts of combat and survival. The diplomatic delegation consisted of several scientists, ambassadors, and military leaders, but the star of the group was Dr. Elias Carter, a well-known xenoanthropologist. Elias had spent his entire career studying alien cultures, languages, and histories. He was fascinated by the diversity of life in the universe and always dreamed of meeting species like the Rokorians. So when the opportunity arose to visit Venkera, Elias couldn't believe his luck. The group arrived in the capital city of Vorak, a grand metropolis with towering structures and advanced technology. It was a sight unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The buildings were made of materials that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, and the streets were filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. But it was the Rokorians who dominated the scene. They moved with an air of authority and strength, and their presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The delegation was invited to a grand banquet in honor of the alliance. The hall was vast, filled with towering pillars and soft, glowing lights that bathed the room in a warm golden hue. The Rokorians sat at the head of the hall, with their leader, Commander Zeria Velikor, seated at the center. She was an imposing figure, standing well over 8 feet tall, with strong, muscular limbs, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to look right through anyone who dared meet her gaze. Her presence commanded respect, and even the other species in the room couldn't help but feel the weight of her authority. As the banquet progressed, Elias found himself drawn to Zeria. He had read about her. She was one of the highest-ranking officials in the Rokorian military, a fierce warrior known for her leadership skills and tactical brilliance. But there was more to her than just her physical strength. Elias had heard whispers that Zeria had never chosen a mate, something that was considered unusual among her people. The Rokorians had a long history of strong romantic partnerships, and Zeria's single status had become the subject of many rumors. Elias didn't think much of it at first. He was there on official business, after all, not for personal matters. But when Zeria's gaze met his across the room, something shifted. She looked at him with curiosity, her eyes narrowing slightly as if sizing him up. Elias, nervous but intrigued, held her gaze for a moment before looking away. His heart raced. Was she interested in him? He wasn't sure. The moment passed, but the tension between them lingered. Later in the evening, Zeria approached Elias with a calm but commanding stride. The room seemed to quiet as she walked toward him, her presence unmistakable. She stopped just a few feet away, towering over him. Elias stood frozen, unsure of what to say. "Dr. Carter." Zeria's voice was deep and resonant, carrying an almost musical quality. "I have observed you. You are unlike the others. You are curious." Elias blinked, caught off guard. I mean no disrespect, Commander. I'm simply here to learn about your culture." Zeria studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Your kind is different," she said slowly, as if testing the words. "You are small, yet your minds are sharp. You endure through things that would break others. Your spirit is strong. I wonder if you could endure more than your body allows." Elias felt his throat tighten. He had heard that the Rokorians had a tradition of physical challenges, but he hadn't expected anything like this. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Zeria's lips curled into a faint smile. "I offer you a challenge. she said. "A test of your strength, endurance, and spirit. If you pass, I will consider you worthy of my time." Elias was confused. "A challenge?" he asked, glancing around. The other delegates were watching the exchange, and Elias could sense the growing tension in the air. The Rokorian commander nodded. "In my culture, we do not simply accept anyone. We test them. If you are to understand the Rokorian way, you must first prove yourself." Elias swallowed, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. He wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but he knew one thing for certain. This was a moment he couldn't back down from. The challenge was set. Elias had no idea what he was truly walking into, but there was no turning back now. Commander Zaria's gaze was unyielding, her face an unreadable mask, yet her words had a quiet intensity that seemed to echo in his mind. The room around them had fallen silent, and every pair of eyes was now trained on him. "Very well. Then," Zaria said, her voice low but firm, "I will see if you have the strength to endure. The first trial will begin tomorrow at dawn. Be ready, human." Before Elias could ask any further questions, she turned and walked away, her long strides carrying her with the grace of a predator. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting as the whispers began. But Elias stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. What had just happened? He had no intention of being part of any challenge, especially one that seemed to involve physical trials. But there was no choice now. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Elias tried to stay focused on the conversations around him, but his thoughts were consumed with the upcoming test. The Rokorians were known for their strength and ferocity. What could he possibly do to impress someone like Zaria, a towering warrior who could probably crush him with a single blow? As he lay in his quarters that night, Elias couldn't sleep. His mind was full of questions. Why had Zaria chosen him? He was just a scientist, not a fighter. Was she testing him for some deeper purpose? Or was this just part of Rokorian tradition? Either way, he knew he had to find a way to prove himself. The next morning, Elias awoke early, determined to prepare in whatever way he could. He found his way to the training grounds, a vast open area filled with obstacles, hurdles, and climbing structures designed for the Rokorian warriors. The sight of it made his stomach twist. This wasn't the type of environment a human would excel in. He was small, and his body was nowhere near as strong as theirs. But he couldn't back down now. Zaria was already there, waiting for him. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering as she looked down at him. Her posture was a reminder of how different they were. Despite the towering difference in height and muscle, Elias felt an odd sense of calm in her presence. He couldn't help but admire her. She was a leader, and not just in title. She had earned that position through sheer will and strength. "Are you ready, Dr. Carter?" Zaria's voice broke his thoughts. She didn't seem to expect an answer. "This first trial will test your endurance. You will run the course, but at my pace. Keep up, and you will pass this part." Elias nodded, taking a deep breath. There was no way he could outrun Zaria, but he could try to keep up. The trial began with a loud signal from one of the Rokorian assistants, and they were off. Zaria moved with the precision and power of someone who had trained for years. Her long legs made the obstacles look like simple hurdles, while Elias struggled to keep pace. He was panting and sweating within minutes, but he didn't dare stop. Every time he faltered, Zaria's sharp gaze would lock onto him, and he felt a push to keep moving, even if his legs were begging him to stop. The course wasn't just physical, it tested his mind as well. He had to memorize patterns, solve puzzles on the run, and make quick decisions that involved both agility and intellect. Though his body lagged behind, Elias' sharp mind kicked in. He would take shortcuts where he could, using his knowledge of strategy and problem-solving to make up for his lack of physical strength. Zaria seemed impressed by his quick thinking, though she said nothing during the entire trial. She just watched, her expression unreadable. The other Rokorians, who stood on the sidelines, murmured among themselves, occasionally casting glances at Elias. Despite the exhaustion settling in his muscles, Elias pushed through. The pain was real, but so was his determination. He couldn't let Zaria down, not just for himself but for his people. This challenge wasn't just about him. It was about showing that humanity, though small, was capable of great things. He knew that if he could somehow impress Zaria, it could change the way the galaxy saw Earth. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the end of the course. Elias was out of breath, his legs trembling with fatigue, but he had finished. Zaria stopped beside him, towering over him with an unreadable expression. "You have passed the endurance trial," she said, her voice calm. "But there is more to strength than just endurance." Elias collapsed to the ground, his body sore and aching, but he allowed himself a moment of relief. He had made it. The first trial was done. But Zaria was right. Endurance was just one part of the challenge. What else would she test him on? Zaria stood over him for a moment longer before speaking again. "Rest now. The next trial will be soon. Prepare yourself, human. It will require more than just physical strength." Elias could only nod. He had survived the first test, but the real challenge had only just begun. Elias woke up early the next morning, his body sore from the previous day's trial. He had never pushed himself so hard, but there was something within him that refused to quit. The thought of disappointing Zaria, or, worse, making humanity look weak in front of the Rakorians, kept him going. But as he stretched his stiff muscles and prepared for whatever came next, Elias couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for Zaria. She had been a fierce competitor during the first trial, but more than that, she had shown him something unexpected. Beneath her intimidating presence and warrior strength, Elias had seen a kind of quiet wisdom. It was as though she could see more than just his physical abilities. She was testing something deeper. The Rakorian warrior culture was built on trials of strength, but Elias suspected that Zaria had other reasons for putting him through these challenges. She was giving him more than a chance to prove himself. She was offering him an opportunity to understand her world in a way few others could. As Elias prepared for the second trial, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more at stake here than just completing the challenges. Could Zaria be testing his character? Could she be looking for something beyond physical strength? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't back down now. The second trial began that afternoon, and this time, it wasn't about endurance or physical ability. Instead, Zaria had set up a series of mental challenges designed to test Elias' problem-solving skills and decision-making abilities. The arena was quieter now, with only a few Rakorians watching from the sidelines. Zaria stood in the center, her arms crossed as she surveyed Elias, her sharp eyes studying his every move. "The Rakorians value intelligence as much as strength," Zaria said, her voice calm and steady. "A warrior must be able to think quickly in the heat of battle, and you must prove that you can do the same. This trial will test your mind." Elias nodded, taking a deep breath as he prepared for the first challenge. The floor beneath him shifted, and large stone slabs began to rise from the ground, forming a complex maze. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple puzzle, but as Elias studied it more closely, he realized that there were hidden traps. Pressing the wrong stone could trigger a series of obstacles or barriers, making the task much harder. Zaria watched closely as Elias began to navigate the maze, his sharp mind analyzing each step. His training as a scientist had prepared him for problems like this. He wasn't a warrior, but he was no stranger to challenges that required thinking ahead. He took his first step carefully, testing the stones one by one. His movements were slow at first, but with each step, he grew more confident. There were moments when he hesitated, unsure whether he was making the right choice, but he pushed forward, relying on his instincts and his ability to remain calm under pressure. Zaria did not speak, but Elias could feel her watching him intently. He knew that she was testing him in more ways than one. This trial wasn't just about solving the maze. It was about how he approached the challenge, how he handled uncertainty, and how he used his intelligence to overcome obstacles. Finally, after what felt like hours, Elias reached the center of the maze. The stone slabs began to lower, signaling that the trial was complete. He had made it through without triggering any traps, using nothing but his wits and careful planning. Zaria approached him, her face still unreadable. For a moment, there was silence as she examined him, her piercing gaze never leaving him. Then, finally, she spoke. "You did well," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of approval. "You relied on your intellect, not just your physical abilities. This is the mark of a true strategist." Elias felt a surge of pride, but he kept his expression neutral. "Thank you, Commander. I did my best." Zaria's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was gone almost as soon as it appeared. "The trials are not just tests. They are lessons," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "Strength is important, but so is wisdom. If you are to represent your people, you must understand that." Elias nodded, taking in her words. He was beginning to understand more about the Rokorian way. It wasn't about brute strength or domination. It was about balance, strength and intelligence, courage and wisdom, respect for both physical prowess and the mind. Zaria's next words surprised him. "I did not expect you to pass this trial as quickly as you did. Most humans would have failed, but you showed that you have more than just strength. You have potential." Elias felt a warmth spread through him at her praise. He hadn't expected to gain her approval, but it felt good to know that his efforts were being recognized. Zaria studied him for a moment longer, then said, "There is one final trial. It will test you in ways that no trial before it has. Are you ready?" Elias wasn't sure what to expect, but he nodded firmly. "I'm ready." Zaria's expression softened, just for a moment, before returning to its usual stoic demeanor. "Good. Prepare yourself, Dr. Carter. The final trial will begin tomorrow." As Elias walked away from the arena, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect and understanding for the Rokorian commander. The trials weren't just about proving himself, they were about learning. Learning to think, to grow, and to adapt in ways he never thought possible. Tomorrow would be the final test, and Elias was more determined than ever to face it. The days following the second trial were quiet. Elias had proven himself to Zaria, but now a new kind of tension was beginning to build. Though the Rokorians had shown nothing but respect for him, there were whispers growing louder within the Galactic Union. Some species, particularly the Xelthans, were not happy with the idea of a human gaining favor with such a respected warrior as Zaria. The Xelthans, a species known for their cunning and political maneuvering, had always considered themselves the most powerful race in the galaxy. Their elegant yet dangerous appearance and sophisticated technology made them formidable opponents in any diplomatic negotiation. However, the rise of the Rokorians as peacekeepers had threatened their position. To see a human, someone they considered primitive and weak, winning over Zaria's respect felt like a personal blow. Elias was still unaware of the growing discontent within the Union. He focused on preparing for the final trial, determined to give it his all. The challenge would be unlike anything he had faced before, and Zaria had made it clear that it would be both physically and mentally demanding. On the morning of the final trial, Elias arrived at the training grounds, his heart pounding in his chest. Zaria was already there, standing tall and commanding in her usual warrior posture. She gestured for him to approach. "This final trial will test your strength in a way you've never known," she said. "It will not be easy, but it will show me what you are truly capable of. Only then will you have earned the right to stand beside us." Elias nodded, trying to calm his nerves. He was prepared, or so he thought. As he looked around, he saw the trial area was different from the others. This time, there were no simple mazes or endurance tests. In the center of the arena stood an enormous structure, a towering wall, covered in sharp metal spikes and dangerous traps. "You will climb this wall," Zaria said simply. "You must reach the top within 20 minutes. Fail, and you will be removed from this trial." Elias felt his stomach drop. The wall loomed above him, a fortress of obstacles. It was higher than anything he had ever seen, and the thought of scaling it filled him with doubt. He was not built for this kind of challenge. The strength of the Ricorians was legendary, and Elias could already feel the weight of his limitations pressing down on him. Zaria seemed to sense his hesitation, though her face remained impassive. "You are a strategist, Dr. Carter. Think before you act. The wall is not meant to be climbed with sheer strength. You must use your mind." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. His mind began to race, looking for any possible way to overcome the wall's imposing height and dangers. Elias had no hope of matching Zaria's physical abilities. He had to rely on his intelligence, the very thing that had gotten him this far. With a final glance at Zaria, Elias stepped forward and reached for the first handhold. His fingers grasped the rough surface, and he began to climb. The first few moments were slow as he carefully found his footing, avoiding the spikes and traps. The Ricorians had designed the wall to test every aspect of their challenger's abilities: strength, agility, and problem-solving. Every move had to be calculated. One wrong step, and Elias knew he would be forced to start over, or worse, fall to the ground below. His arms burned as he climbed, his muscles straining with each movement. But Elias was determined. He remembered Zaria's words, "Think before you act." He couldn't afford to rush. The spikes that lined the wall were deadly sharp, and the traps, hidden among the cracks, would cause him to lose precious time if triggered. As Elias neared the halfway point, his heart raced. His legs were sore, and sweat dripped down his forehead. He was tiring quickly. But then he noticed something: a small lever on the side of the wall, partially hidden in the shadow of a large stone protrusion. He hesitated for a moment, considering his options. What could it do? Elias pulled himself closer to the lever and, with careful precision, activated it. Immediately, a series of ropes and pulleys began to work, shifting the spikes on the wall and creating new paths. The wall had changed. Elias had found a way to use the structure against itself, and he could now climb more efficiently. He moved quickly, using the new handholds and footholds that the lever had revealed. His mind raced with calculations, weighing the risks of each new move. He wasn't just climbing. He was thinking through every possibility, finding solutions that would give him an edge. It wasn't the physical strength that mattered here. It was his ability to adapt. As he neared the top of the wall, the final challenge loomed. A series of jagged rocks that formed a narrow ledge just below the summit. Elias looked up at the ledge and knew that one misstep could send him plummeting. But he had no choice. With a final burst of effort, he reached for the edge and pulled himself up. His arms shook with exhaustion, but he had made it. Elias stood at the top, panting and covered in sweat, but victorious. Zaria stood at the base of the wall, watching him with an unreadable expression. She didn't speak immediately, but after a long moment, she nodded in approval. "You have done it," she said. "You have passed the final trial." Elias could barely find his voice. He was exhausted, but he had made it. He had proven himself to Zaria, and perhaps in some small way to himself. However, as he descended from the wall, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was still ahead of him. The Union's opposition to his success had only just begun, and he knew that there would be forces at work, beyond the trials, that would test not only his strength but the strength of humanity itself. Elias stood at the top of the towering wall, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His arms were sore, his legs trembling from the climb, but there was an undeniable sense of triumph in his heart. The final trial was over, and he had passed. But despite his success, there was a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. The battle he had won here today was only one part of a much larger struggle. Zaria's gaze remained fixed on him, but this time, there was something different in her eyes. A mixture of respect, and something else, something unreadable. "You have earned your place, Dr. Carter," she said, her voice steady. But the real test is not over. What happens next will decide your future with the Rokorian people and with the Galactic Union. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had expected Zaria to offer congratulations, but the weight of her words hit him harder than anything he had faced during the trials. What was she talking about? He descended from the wall, his feet landing softly on the ground. Zaria's expression remained impassive, but there was a tension in her stance. "Come with me," she said, motioning for him to follow. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking toward a large building on the outskirts of the arena. Elias fell into step behind her, trying to make sense of her words. The trials were supposed to be a means of testing his worth, of proving that humanity could stand alongside the Rokordans. But now, it seemed that the real challenge was yet to come. As they walked, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had won the trials, but something in the air felt off. He could sense a shift, a change in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the silent onlookers who had gathered to watch the trials. It was the look on Zaria's face, the seriousness in her eyes, that made him uneasy. When they reached the building, Zaria paused at the entrance. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Something is coming, Dr. Carter," she said quietly. "Something that you and I both need to prepare for." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. What did she mean? What could be more dangerous than the trials themselves? Zaria stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. The room inside was dimly lit, filled with holographic maps and various pieces of technology. It looked like a war room, and Elias couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. "I've been hearing rumors," Zaria continued, her voice low. "The Galactic Union is not happy with your success here. They are threatened by the idea of a human rising through the ranks of the Rokorians. There are forces at work who want to see you fail." Elias felt his stomach twist. He had known there would be opposition, but he hadn't realized how deep it ran. The Galactic Union was a powerful alliance of multiple species, each with its own agenda. He had no idea how far they would go to maintain control. But hearing Zaria's words made it clear that there were people who would stop at nothing to prevent humanity from taking a stronger position in the galaxy. "They think you are a threat," Zaria said, her voice growing more intense. "Not just because of the trials, but because of what your success represents. A human proving themselves worthy in a galaxy dominated by stronger races. It's an idea that terrifies them." Elias felt a pang of fear in his chest. He had never wanted to be a symbol of resistance or revolution. He was just a scientist, a man trying to do his best for humanity. But now, it seemed he had become something more, a symbol of hope for those who believed in equality between species, and a target for those who feared it. "What do they plan to do?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. Zaria looked around the room, her expression hardening. "There are factions within the Union that would rather see you silenced than allow this to continue. They're already discussing methods to undermine your standing with the Rokordans. Some want to discredit you, while others may take more drastic actions." Elias swallowed hard. He had known the stakes were high, but he hadn't imagined it would come to this. How could he possibly stand against the combined power of the Union and the Rokorian elite? Zaria stepped closer to him, her expression softening for a moment. "This isn't about just you, Dr. Carter. This is about the future of your people. If the Union succeeds in stopping you, they'll make sure no human ever stands a chance of gaining this kind of respect again. It's up to you now." Elias nodded, his mind racing. The weight of the situation was heavier than any trial he had faced. He had proven himself worthy of standing alongside the Rokordans, but now the real battle was in the political arena. It was no longer just about strength or intellect. It was about survival. "We need to act quickly," Elias said, his voice steady now, the fire of determination beginning to spark in his chest. "What can I do?" Zaria's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval. "We start by gaining support. You'll need allies in the Union, people who believe in the same ideals you do. The road ahead will not be easy, but if you stand firm, you may just change the course of history." Elias took a deep breath. This was no longer about the Ricorian trials. This was about something far bigger, about the future of humanity, the balance of power in the galaxy, and the fight for equality among all species. Zaria turned toward the table, where a map of the galaxy was projected, pinpointing various Union strongholds and potential allies. "The first step is to find those who can help us," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "And together, we will ensure that humanity has a voice." Elias stood in the command room, his eyes fixed on the map that illuminated the darkened walls. The galaxy seemed so vast, so filled with endless possibilities. And yet, in that moment, it felt smaller than ever. Every path forward seemed filled with uncertainty, every choice dangerous. Zaria's words echoed in his mind. "If the Union succeeds in stopping you, no human will ever stand a chance again." The weight of that responsibility hung heavy on his shoulders. Elias had never imagined that his journey would lead him to this. He had come to the Ricorians as a scientist, eager to learn, to prove himself. But now, his success in the trials had made him the target of powerful forces. The very future of humanity's place in the galaxy was at stake. Zaria's voice broke through his thoughts. "We cannot afford to wait any longer. The Union is already mobilizing their forces to discredit you. They'll strike soon. We need to act now." Elias nodded, trying to mask the rising tension in his chest. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. It wasn't just about surviving the trials anymore. It was about survival itself. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a symbol, a potential spark of hope, or a dangerous threat to the old order of the galaxy. "Where do we start?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety building inside him. Zaria's hand hovered over the map. "There are 3 factions within the Union who might be sympathetic to your cause," she explained. "The first is the Gornaxian Collective, a race of technologically advanced beings who value intellect and scientific progress. They have a long history of supporting human scientists." Elias felt a flicker of hope. The Gornaxians were one of the few species in the galaxy who treated humans with a sense of equality. He knew their support would be crucial. "And the second?" he asked. "The second is the Illyrian Confederacy," Zaria continued. "A coalition of species who are mostly concerned with maintaining peace and balance throughout the galaxy. They have been hesitant to get involved in Ricorian matters, but I believe they would support us if we can show them the importance of your role in this conflict." Elias thought for a moment. The Illyrians were known for their diplomacy, but their reluctance to get involved in disputes made them unpredictable. They would need solid proof that humanity's involvement in the galaxy was not just a threat, but an opportunity for growth. "And the third?" Elias asked, already knowing how important each choice would be. Zaria's eyes darkened. "The third is the Scythian Empire," she said quietly. "They are a militaristic species, and while their values may not align with yours, they could offer the strength we need. Their support may be difficult to secure, but they are pragmatic. If they see an advantage in backing you, they will." Elias absorbed her words. The Gornaxians would be the most natural allies, the Illyrians were a wild card, and the Scythians, though powerful, would be the most difficult to persuade. It was clear that each faction represented a different path, and Elias would have to navigate them carefully. "We'll need to meet with all of them," Elias said, determination settling in. "We can't afford to leave any stone unturned." Zaria gave him a sharp look. "Exactly. And you must be prepared for the challenges ahead. There are those in the Union who will try to manipulate these factions against you, to turn them into enemies instead of allies. It will take everything you have to secure their support." Elias took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. It was overwhelming, but it was also his only chance. If he failed, humanity's future would be forever diminished in the eyes of the galaxy. He couldn't let that happen. As Zaria motioned toward the communication console, Elias felt a small spark of resolve ignite in him. They had to be swift. The Union would not wait, and neither could they. Hours later, Elias found himself aboard a Rokorian transport ship, heading to the Gornaxian homeworld. The journey was long, but it gave him time to reflect. The Gornaxians were known for their vast knowledge and technological advancements. If there was any group that could truly understand humanity's potential, it was them. Zaria stood beside him, her presence as commanding as ever. She had been a constant throughout the trials, a powerful ally who had guided him through every challenge. But now the dynamic had changed. She was no longer just his mentor. She was his partner in this delicate political dance. "We have to be careful," Zaria said, her voice low. "The Gornaxians are pragmatic, but they are not easily swayed. They will want proof, and they will test you. They'll ask questions about humanity's future, its intentions, and whether we can truly stand alongside the other species of the galaxy." Elias nodded. He had anticipated that. He had to be ready to answer those questions, to show that humanity wasn't just some passing species, but a force that could contribute to the galaxy's future in ways they had yet to imagine. "What will you tell them?" Zaria asked, her gaze focused on the stars outside the ship's window. Elias thought for a moment. "I'll tell them the truth. I'll tell them that humanity is more than just a species of survivalists. We're thinkers, creators, explorers. We want to be a part of this galaxy, not just as a species trying to survive, but as equals." Zaria's eyes softened slightly. "Then let's hope they believe you." As the ship hurtled toward Gornax, Elias felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be long, and the challenges even greater. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Elias stood before the massive, gleaming gates of the Gornaxian capital. The towering structures, with their sleek, metallic surfaces, reflected the light of distant stars. Everything about this world spoke of progress, innovation, and power. The Gornaxians had built their civilization with technology that far surpassed anything humanity had ever achieved. It was a place that felt almost alien in its perfection. Zaria stood beside him, her expression as unreadable as ever. Their journey to this point had been long and fraught with challenges, but now, standing on the precipice of the most important meeting of his life, Elias couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach. This was the moment that could change everything. The Gornaxians were their best hope for gaining the support they needed to face the Galactic Union. They were led through the gates by an escort of Gornaxian soldiers, tall beings with silvery skin and angular features. Despite their appearance, there was a calmness to their movements, an almost serene quality that came from a civilization accustomed to power and peace. As they entered the Grand Hall, Elias took in the surroundings. The room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into the shadows above, and the walls were lined with intricate carvings that told the story of the Gornaxian people. These carvings weren't just decorative. They were records of history, art, and knowledge, a testament to the Gornaxians' deep respect for learning. At the far end of the hall sat the Council of Elders, their faces stern and impassive. These were the leaders of the Gornaxian collective, the decision-makers whose judgment would determine the fate of Elias and humanity's place in the galaxy. As Elias and Zaria approached the council, the tension in the air grew thick. The lead elder, a tall, imposing figure named Shaurix, raised a hand, signaling for silence. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and measured. "You come before us as a human," Shaurix said, his gaze shifting to Elias. "A species we have long observed, but never fully understood. Why should we support you? Why should we risk our standing with the Galactic Union for your cause?" Elias felt the weight of the question pressing on him. He had prepared for this moment, but now, facing the full power of the Gornaxian Council, his mind raced. How could he make them see humanity's worth? How could he convince them that their support would not only help humanity, but also benefit the entire galaxy? He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm not here to ask for your charity, Elder Shaurix," Elias began. "I'm here because humanity has something to offer the galaxy. We may not be as advanced as you, but we are resourceful, determined, and capable of extraordinary things. Our greatest strength isn't our technology, it's our adaptability. We've survived through wars, diseases, and countless challenges. We've learned to build, to create, to think beyond what we've been given. Elias paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. He could feel the eyes of the council members on him, their expressions unreadable. But he didn't falter. This was his moment to prove humanity's worth, and he would not waste it. We don't seek to dominate or control. We seek to be a part of something greater, to stand alongside the galaxy's most advanced species, not as equals in name only, but as true partners. We want to contribute, to bring fresh ideas, and to help solve the challenges we all face. The room was silent for a long moment. Elias could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he refused to look away. This was the future of humanity he was fighting for, not just for himself, but for every human who had ever dreamed of a place in the stars. Finally, Shalric spoke. Your words are convincing, human. But words are only part of the equation. You seek our support, but you must prove that humanity is worthy of it. Elias felt a surge of hope. What do you want me to prove? Shalric leaned forward, his piercing eyes never leaving Elias. We have a test, a demonstration of your species' potential. If you pass, we will consider your request. If you fail, your efforts will be meaningless. Zaria stepped forward, her posture as commanding as ever. What is this test, Elder? Shalric's gaze shifted to her, and he nodded slowly. It is a trial of intellect and resolve. You will need to solve a complex problem that has stumped even our best minds. If you succeed, we will see humanity as a true partner. If you fail, you will prove that your species is not yet ready for the responsibilities that come with galactic unity. Elias's heart skipped a beat. The stakes had just been raised, and the challenge was unlike anything he had ever faced before. But he wasn't about to back down. He had fought through every trial the Ricorians had thrown at him. This would be no different. I accept your challenge, Elias said, his voice firm. Shalric nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. We shall see, human. We shall see. As the council began to prepare the test, Zaria placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. You've done well so far. But now, it's time to prove your true worth. Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. The future of humanity rested on his shoulders. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now.